was a thief, a plagiarist, a murderer of creativity.
Jack Howard? No, never heard of him.
I don't quite recall who he was, but he was very reclusive.
He was nothing, a nobody, and you know it.
Who was Jack Howard? That's the question many ask themselves when they first stumble upon what may be the strangest and most mysterious filmmaker in the history of film. He has eluded film historians, researchers, and enthusiasts alike with a host of contradictory details that add up to nothing cohesive. For some, he's someone much better forgotten than to be remembered. Never in American cinema has there been someone so mysterious, so enigmatic, and yet so little known about, although few have come close. Throughout his life, he refused to speak about his private life, and was a mystery even to those who worked with him. He was forgotten for so long that few details about him survived. Even in academia, he wasn't spoken of too much, and was little more than a footnote in film history. Yet what made this filmmaker so alluring was the fact that not one of his films have survived wholly intact. What remained of them was a mystery. Film scholars and critics have treated him indifferently, with renowned film critic Andrew Saris once referencing it offhandedly in an interview, saying it was a hopeless enigma, tempting for the aspiring film enthusiast, but nothing more than that. In the same interview, he admitted that he never got the chance to see any of his films except one in a print in very poor condition. The film itself seemed to be falling apart, he noted. Nevertheless, he classed Jack as a lesser von Sternberg, with the inventiveness of Abel Gance. For decades his life was unknown save for a few scraps of evidence, dubious at best, and continues to mystify and puzzle film historians. Jack was a man of many sides, and none of them fit into easy categorization. There have been many various descriptions of him, each differing according to who was speaking. Some described him as tall, scrawny, and long-necked, others of medium height, with large, mysterious eyes and thick eyebrows. Everyone saw him in a different way, even downright contradicting each other. Even Jack himself gave contradictory statements throughout his life. He was a man of contradictions, of paradoxes, of which he was endlessly fascinated with. Some called him tyrannical, others collaborative and visionary. He was a martyr of art, a rejected recluse. His films were audacious, unconventional, and kinetic, blending modernism with the avant-garde, mixing genres and pushing the boundaries of commercial cinema, yet forgotten soon after being released. They exploded with feverish energy of an original artist, perplexing many, and drew divisive, diverse opinions. His mind was an innovative and inventive one, nothing short of revolutionary. Vigilance and observation were his key traits. He was always thinking, preferring to stay in the shadows. To most people, he simply ceased to exist. Some have even postulated that it was all an elaborate hoax, an inside joke for film buffs. It makes one wonder, who was he really? Jack was born Jack Howard Pyle, to Bertrand Pyle and Eleonora, née Roberts. It is thought that his middle name was given in honor of his father's favorite illustrator, Howard Pyle. No one source agrees as to when Jack was born, or where. Like many at the time, he had no birth certificate, and his parents did not keep a baptismal record. Jack himself made numerous contradictory statements about his origins in interviews, giving conflicting dates and locations throughout various times of his life. Film scholar Jerome Jones states his birth to be on August 29, 1902, in Green Bay, Wisconsin, whereas Walter Stewart's Encyclopedia of American Filmmakers gives his birth to be February 11, 1908, in Eugene, Oregon. The one Jack used most frequently was November 28, 1905, in Tarrytown, New York, although later sources have pointed out that he did not have a New York accent. It is, however, most likely that he was born in or near Kansas City, Missouri, between December 28th to 29th, 1906 or 1907. However, Marvin Cook Jr.'s much disputed biography makes him much younger, citing evidence from an expired worker license from his apprenticeship years. Not much is known about his childhood, other than that he lived in a relatively small neighborhood near Kansas City. Howard was introduced to cinema at age 8, when his father took him to a small theater to see films, most of which were from the Edison Company. He vividly recalled his experience after seeing Frankenstein in a letter. The utter bewilderment I felt in seeing that monster come to life was a mix of both horrifying dread and excited wonder. By the age of 16, he had left his parents and took on the job as an intertitle writer and assistant editor for a company that made promotional films for, among other businesses, shipyard companies. However, a curious newspaper article dated March 24th, 1925, has been discovered in which a young man named Jack Howard had been killed in a car accident. The combustion engine had exploded, causing the car to burst into flames, where it crashed into a nearby building. Although this may seem quite strange, this is not the same Jack Howard who became the unsung filmmaker, although many do try to explain why such a person with the same name had been killed at around the same time and at around the same age, although none were ever satisfactory. One of the films that made a tremendous impact on Jack Howard in his early life and made him decide to pursue filmmaking was Joseph von Sternberg's debut film, The Salvation Hunters. The film was screened by the company he worked for, and according to Dale MacArthur, a friend from his teenage years, he was ecstatic for many days about it. He was also known to be a fan of Sternberg's underworld, Abel Gantz's J. Accuse and La Rue, and was known to have kept a private copy of the former. Other cinematic influences that were evident were Erich von Stroheim, early Hitchcock silence, the city symphony genre, and Elias Wallace, the great director of gripping crime films, who was to become his mentor, teaching him the process and art of filmmaking. His early life has, on the whole, been very difficult to piece together. Notable film scholar Chris Copenhagen summed it up quite clearly in his book, Where the Past Leads, History of American Cinema, 1915 to 1945, when he wrote, "None could quite make out what upbringing Jack had. They all seemed to be telling different stories." A compendium of the theories of his origins has been explored in his essay, The Genesis of Jack Howard, The Making of a Mystery. By 1928, he was able to secure funding to make his debut feature film, The Fruits of Solitude. He screened the film in a small theater in Kansas City in June 1929, where it caught the attention of producer Preston J. Stanley, a middle-aged man with horn-rimmed glasses from Lawrence, Kansas. He had taken a liking to the early efforts Jack had made so far. Despite its roughness, Jack's early work impressed Stanley in what he saw as a grand upcoming filmmaker. He was surprised by their vivacity. You'd think he'd been making films for decades, he was quoted as saying. His production company, Astoria Pictures, previously Fitz Preston Pictures, had for the most part been producing low-budget films shot mostly on location, and he wished to apprentice the young Jack as a new directorial talent. This Jack readily accepted. Throughout the 1930s, it is known that Jack made at least 3 films with Astoria Pictures, all of which were widely praised. These were The Genesis of Secrecy, 1931, The Possessed, 1933, about a man who believes he is possessed by the ghost of his long-dead brother, and The Burning Sigh, 1934. The latter is the most well-known of these films. The film starred Jane Marsh as a young woman in Madison, Wisconsin, who sends written letters to a lady in Georgia who is never shown on screen. Her only correspondence with her is through the letters she sends and receives. As their correspondence grows, the two women begin sharing dark secrets and desires between themselves, so dark and twisted that she has to burn every reply she receives as soon as she reads it. These include secrets about other people they knew too. Her husband soon grows concerned about her behavior, that she ultimately decides to run away and move to the place where her friend lives. To her ultimate shock, she discovers that the woman she's been writing to this entire time was actually herself, her doppelganger. She chokes in shock and utter bewilderment letting out one last sigh before fainting, suffering a heart attack. The film was Jack's first large success, both critically and commercially. Most of the reviews were positive, complimenting his unusual cinematic technique with the equally bizarre drama. A review from Film Mercury described it as a blend of melodrama with the supernatural. Many praised the twist ending. It even frightened some of the audience members. However, despite the positive outcome, the film did have problems regarding censorship, with some states demanding cuts for certain concerning scenes. Then the war broke out and soon Astoria Pictures went defunct. Preston J. Stanley, in despair, quit the film business entirely. Nothing is known about Jack during this time, except that he made a living making short documentary films, most of them for railroad companies. With little money left, Jack was forced to work in Poverty Row, first with Grand National Films, and later with Capital Artist Pictures. These films were purely commercial efforts, typically for double features, and he declined to take credit for them. Yet they were not enough to produce more films, forcing Jack to take on the job of directing his first studio film, The Rendezvous, under the direction of executive Carl H. Schwarzkopf for RKO in 1942. Many stories abound about Jack's life in Hollywood. Film scholar Craig Rowley described this period of his life as a tumultuous point in his career. He took advantage of his time there to realize films of daring, artistic experimentation that would be the hallmark of noir cinema. He made dramas, psychological thrillers, an unconventional biopic of Harry Houdini, and strange mystery noirs with unconventional, mind-bending narrative structures, playing with your mind. A majority of them appeared to be low-budget B pictures, but they all excelled beyond expectations, stunning those in the film industry. They thought him a prodigy, a wonderkind. The films combined the best of European cinema with a unique touch and vision that was peculiar only to him. Yet he also churned out more commercial work, including the hit musical picture Tap Dancer, which were inferior in quality when compared to his greatest efforts but were popular with the masses. Jack seemed to have regretted this decision, for his final film for RKO was Phantom of Pleasure, marking a return to the artistically daring films of the 30s. It was around this time that he married his first wife, 26-year-old star Laura Lynn. It was telling that she only starred in one film of his, as Melanie Gidding, in The Sound Out of Time. The reason for this, some say, was the perfectionist attitude of the filmmaker, who had a penchant for detail and minute observation. Others say that it was her headstrong, independent nature that interfered with Jack's creative process and the films he was making her own alterations to the script's dialogue as she performed on camera. Jack, never the compromising type, clashed heads with her, and although she wished to star in his other films, Jack absolutely denied it after the difficult and stressful experience working with her in The Sound Out of Time. During the time they spent together, they attended numerous parties, mingling with other well-known figures in the business. At all times, Lynn kept a sharp eye on where her husband's gaze went. This constricted environment, they say, eventually made Jack engage in a passionate love affair with another, much younger, starlet by the name of Scarlett Banks, who subsequently played in Phantom of Pleasure. It did not take long for the meticulous Lynn to find out, and in a tempest of rage set the dresses and clothes that he bought for her on fire and threw them out from her apartment balcony in Los Feliz. They divorced soon after. In 1955, she quit cinema and became a stage actress. She died in 1986. In 1946, he married actress Sylvania White, a lavish blonde of Sweden descent, who, according to Jack, looked like an ice princess. He offered her many roles, none of which she accepted. They divorced a year later, but the reason why isn't clear. In between and after these marriages were many love affairs with numerous actresses and script girls. Not all of them are known, but some of them include Sierra Miller, Virginia Woolworth, Lily Armstrong, and Amber Leslie. It is speculated that during his time in Los Angeles, he conversed with old legends such as Erich von Stroheim, Josef von Sternberg, and John Renoir. He also dabbled in the supernatural. According to Copenhagen, Jack was taught how to use a spirit board during his early days in Los Angeles, and on more than one occasion, attended a seance, and kept totems and talismans in his own house, some of which he made himself. He turned to 20th Century Fox for one picture, the critical darling painted Lady Butterfly, starring Aurora Ashby. It was a period film set in the 19th century, and his first film in color. The rest of his time at Fox would be spent on projects that never came to fruition, attaching stars to scripts that would end up nowhere. One project that he spent the most time on was his most ambitious, a film known only under a working title, The Night House. It was to star Barbara Borodin and Randolph Pierce. The primary shooting location was to be the Hotel Majestic located in Pacific Heights, San Francisco. It was to be his second feature in color. However, the film was deemed too expensive and production quickly shut down after a month. It remains a mystery as to what happened, but Malcolm Jennings collected numerous testimonies from crew members who remembered strange occurrences during the filming, like something out of a ghost story. But it appeared Jack witnessed something strange and lurking during the time he spent in the Hotel Majestic, which he continued to stay in even after production for The Night House shut down. He would continue to stay in the hotel as a temporary residence until he left the film industry. His letters alluded to something sinister and unusual, but never quite explicitly stated what that was. It brought about a great change in him and ushered in his sudden leave, although others say he learned deep, dark secrets in California that have yet to be discovered. During his last months at the studio, the president at Fox, Spiro Skouras, begged for him to stay, promising him projects that would get fast-tracked to production, but none of them convinced Jack to continue, and silently he departed Fox on March 1953. It is by this point that we begin to lose sight of the Jack Howard trail, as nobody knew too much about the films he made after releasing Acid Diamond Rain, a modernist film noir released in 1954, Jack's only well-known film after the studio years. By the mid-1950s, Jack completely estranged himself from society. It seemed that he had begun to develop a new identity for himself, wearing clothes from the 20s or even before that, making him look out of place and eccentric. The reason why is unknown, although some have theorized he was on the run from the authorities. It is not known who these men were, only that they belonged to an organization known only by the initials IOC, along with a Greek inscription below it, which was found on a business card lying on a table. Evidence has shown that he left behind proof indicating that he had traveled and stayed in Yugoslavia, which was politically neutral during this time. It is known that he began living with a Yugoslavian woman by the name of Irma Marjanovic, a young journalist and photographer who would become his muse and lover for the remainder of his life. Mark Cousins identified her in a still frame for the supernatural absurdist film The Woman with the Crystal Face in a small role, playing a chambermaid named Ada. What followed during those years was the deepest reserve of silence, a complete withdrawal from the public eye. He became a phantom, and his continual physical changes made him unrecognizable to those who once knew him. Tracking him down became very difficult, as he preferred to use different names and changed locations frequently, and no photos exist of what he looked like during this time. After his disappearance, Irma at once returned to Yugoslavia. She appeared to have never known Jack or that she was ever with him. Like an amnesiac, she would never speak about him ever again. She might have been told to forget everything about him. In 1976, just days before being interviewed on Yugoslavian television, she died in a combustion accident that set her car to explode. By the end of his life, Jack did not make any films. His behavior became more odd and questionable, according to those close to him. He wrote to one friend, "I've seen things you could never have imagined. You wouldn't even believe it yourself if you saw it." No one really knows what Jack did during the last years of his life. The last diary entry officially discovered was dated October 25, 1956, but they were not related to filmmaking. Numerous theories abound among film circles, but evidence has shown that he stayed in numerous old, luxurious hotels, always using different names. Then, on September 28, 1961, just a week before his disappearance, a large fire burned down a vault and parts of a factory a few miles outside of Wilmington, Delaware. Amongst the many films that were destroyed during the fire, the negatives of all of Jack's films were completely lost. The owner of the factory claimed to not have known anything about it, although at the same time no one tried to do anything to stop the fire.
We have heard that this building was so designed as to prevent such explosions. Is this correct?
Well, I don't know anything about the structure of the building, was it designed with anything like that in mind or not, but at least we had it, and it was a dandy, too.
After the fire died down, it was declared that none of the footage was salvageable, and the negatives were lost forever. Sometime afterwards, surviving copies of Jack's films were also reported to have gone missing, as if they had never existed, including from RKO's film library. After that, things became quiet and no one spoke of them afterwards. A great controversy soon arose after his disappearance. It was revealed that a final note was discovered among his papers. In careful handwriting and addressed to his personal assistant, he ordered everything that he had made to be burned, without exception. Nothing was to survive, not a trace of it. He complained about his declining reputation and scathing attacks made upon him, discouraging him from making any more films. He viewed his entire career as an artistic and personal failure, and had no satisfaction with the work he had done, in line with his characteristic perfectionism. It would have been better if he hadn't been known at all, to disappear from the world. Not everybody was convinced as to the legitimacy of the note, with arguments on both sides debating its authenticity. The note still remains controversial to this day, and no one since has proven its authenticity. In the years since, some have thought of his disappearance as a hoax, with some believing that he's still alive somewhere, or that he never existed at all. There have been reported sightings of a man who looked like Jack Howard walking through the streets or in parks at various locations. The dates of the reports never seemed to match up, as they were all over the place. Some were as early as 1956, others in 1964 to 69, then again in 1982 to 4. The reviews that survive suggest that critics, although mostly positive, overlooked his efforts in favor of more commercially appealing pictures and directors. He quickly fell into disfavor and rarely reached the top 10 lists of that year. Although he worked with major talent, he was underappreciated by major critics at the time. As time went on, the reviews became fewer. Critics were beginning to lose interest as they failed to understand his later films. They were described as abstract, inaccessible, and esoteric, in addition to being incoherent. Some even questioned his mental health during this time, whether they were watching what Paul Anders called the cinematic ramblings of a mentally deranged lunatic. Many reviewers thought Jack mad or insane, or mentally deteriorated. Despite this, during his lifetime he accumulated a small host of individuals who admired his work. French filmmaker Claude Chabrol, Alberto Cavalcanti, French literary writer Emile Dorset, Hungarian writer Arthur Koestler, and New York satirical writer Tommy Norman. Then in 1981, the first comprehensive biography to be written about Jack was released, called The Paradoxical Prodigy, The Life, Art and Mystery of Jack Howard, written by Marvin Cook Jr., a film scholar and critic at Princeton University. As a young man, Cook had been fascinated with Golden Age cinema and had eventually came across people who had memories of seeing films by a certain Jack Howard, but never knew what happened to him. He was the first person to publish a book on Jack's life, as well as interview people who had seen Jack's films, describing what they had seen during that time. A rather slim volume, it made some publicity during the time of its publication, especially in film circles. The book became instrumental in bringing Jack back to the forefront for reconsideration, although it wasn't without any problems. Some initially believed Jack to be nothing but a hoax, a fictitious invention of Cook's, but as more validating evidence was discovered, Jack's existence was soon proved to be real. The Paradoxical Prodigy is now considered an inaccurate, sensationalized, and unflattering portrait of the filmmaker in the light of new evidence and knowledge about him. Part of the criticism lies in Cook's skewed and sensational portrayal of Jack as a tyrannical, insane artist who tortured and tormented his actors and crew, half the time not even knowing what he was doing. Cook credits his cinematographer Pete Stryber as being the individual chiefly responsible for the creative vision behind Jack's films. What also came under scrutiny were the descriptions that Cook provided regarding what witnesses saw during screenings of the films at the time of their release. At the time, no one could really dispute with much evidence other than memory what actually went on in his films, or heavily relying on other witnesses or reviews. But through time, Cook's alleged witnesses began to be discovered as dubious at best, fraudulent at worst. trying to make up for the lack of evidence he could provide for his book. Some recollections, such as the actor Benjamin Shaw appearing in Black Feather and Phantom of Pleasure having a color version, have later been proven to be false. Very few people have seen or had vivid recollections of Jack's films. The ones that did tell quite a different story than Jack's current reputation of a second-rate director of B pictures with expressive cinematography and editing. They were much more than that. With the exception of his most popular films, very little evidence remains from the films he made with the exception of titles and synopses, with very few details having resurfaced throughout time. At first there was almost nothing that remained, making it as if they were non-existent. Slowly, still frames, usually taken from newspapers, lobby cards, and film magazines were rediscovered. Other sources of information, such as synopses, script pages, interviews, and reviews were gradually collected used to get an understanding of the film's plot and further details surrounding the background of the film, and to get an indication of what Jack might have been like. This inability to view the footage has resulted in the films being heightened to mythical status, with wild theories and speculations accumulating over time. It is not known if the films themselves matched up to the hearsay people have given them, but the contemporary reviews that have survived seem to indicate that something majestic was on display, a grand spectacle that astounded the masses, even if they couldn't understand it. Throughout the years since, I've kept searching for clues about Jack, anything about him that I could get my hands on. Every bit of information that could be found, even in the most rotten, filthy, and unlikely of places I went to look. It wasn't until 2018 that I suddenly stumbled onto something. I had been preparing research into the Yugoslav Black Wave in Bosnia and Herzegovina and made a trip to Sarajevo, jotting notes and taking photographs of the area. It was during this time, while out in the countryside, that I had chanced upon a dark, worn-down, old wooden house. It was very far off from the nearest houses, nearly half an hour away. I asked some of the locals about it, and they told me that it used to belong to an extremely old man who would never talk to the people there. Seldom was he seen out of the house, usually to feed his sheep, and when he returned he would stay there for long periods of time, weeks or even months. Yet everything was silent and still, as if nobody had ever lived there. Some said that it was haunted by a spectre. When the locals had left, I decided to walk up to the house and take a look inside. I immediately noticed that it seemed as if I had stepped into a different time period, or no time at all. The first thing I noticed was that the floor was covered in sand. I found rooms cluttered with an assortment of things. It looked as if a strong wind had ravaged the place, or had been broken into. Handwritten letters and documents scattered the floor, broken bottles. Photographs pinned onto the walls with thumbtacks. They were of people I had never seen before, families from the 19th century, objects, vehicles, and an old hotel. Stacks of papers mounted the corners of the wall, and still frames of celluloid were hung on clothes pins that looked like they came from motion pictures. There were newspaper clippings. In the back were pin-up photos of Ziegfeld girls, including Barbara Stanwyck, and a collection of film reels. In this room I took whatever I could carry with me, which included a small black book and some photos. In the largest room was a large oak desk. Behind it was a large circular window that nearly filled up the entire space of the wall. There was even more sand here, forming tiny dunes. Sitting in the chair, turned away from the desk, was an extremely old man with thinning white hair. He sat in what seemed to me to be in deadly shock, eyes opened wide with fright. He looked to be nearly 80 or 90 years old, sitting so still that I could have assumed that he had died. As I got closer to him, the old man spoke in what was to be his last dying breaths, his eyes ever staring into the unknown.
Whatever you do, please burn it, all of it, as much as you can. I can't bear the sight of it. No one must know.
Then he was silent. I fell into complete shock, staring in disbelief at what this old man was saying in his breathless gasp of a voice. He seemed to whisper the unspeakable. I noticed that, in his left hand, he clutched a sheet of written parchment. I tried prying open the man's fingers to take it from him, but ended up tearing the paper. The old man to me had become petrified, his mouth in a quiver. There was a haunted look in those weary, wide eyes that saw something unspeakable, something barely expressible in words, a dark, horrifying knowledge that could not be shared. I left the old man in that state, running off in complete fright. Once I left the house, it was all I could think about, and I thought about returning to it to investigate further. But I wouldn't return, for once I came back, the house was no more. I searched everywhere, but could not find it. It seemed to be some kind of mirage. When asked, the locals acted as if the house never existed, although I had the suspicion that it wasn't the first time this had happened. Later I inspected the items I had took with me, first being the crumpled, torn piece of parchment. It was dated October 5th, 1949. I tried to decipher the handwriting, but could only understand certain parts of it. "They keep coming back" was repeated at least twice, and the other,
I may not be the first, but I'm certainly not the last.
the old man never identified himself, but I knew that he was the mythical lost filmmaker. The black book one had retrieved from the house turned out to be a diary in Jack's handwriting. The diary itself was worn, with many pages torn out and numerous pages scrawled in mirror writing and private symbols, but the ones that remained paint a very strange picture of odd details and happenstances. They were written from 1952 to 56, although a handful of entries were dated from the 1910s, with the earliest one being 1896. In one entry dated August 2nd, 1953, he wrote that he would be coming back and forth, in and out, to places that no sane man would ever think would be related. In another strange letter, he described having peculiar sensations while staying in room 410, of intense vibrations and convulsions occurring to him, and his bed shaking uncontrollably. He also heard a low ringing in his ear, and momentary glimpses of light, seeing parts of his life flash right before his eyes. At other times, he saw events from his life move in reverse, others splitting apart. Apart from the evidence and speculations given, it is with the most sincere regret that I cannot say with any certainty what happened to Jack Howard. I don't think anyone can. He continues to fascinate those who continue to search about him, and every new detail brings with it its own set of questions. Who are you, Jack Howard? What did you see? Was it you, or somebody pretending to be you? What did you find out? What were you trying to do? What did they want? What did you find out? What did you know? What did you find out? Where did it all lead? Said they were trying to get rid of him. He got rid of him. The hotel burned for 2 whole days. Nobody could put it out. It put out itself. Hotel Majestic. Keep coming back. Majestic. Wooden house staircase dream. Wooden house staircase dream. Wooden house staircase dream.
I may not be the first, but I'm certainly not